أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Amma ba'd, brothers and sisters in Iman, Salamun Alaikum. We have the blessing of the month of Ramadan to go through the brief review of the surah number 67 of the Quran, Suratul Mulk. The ayat that we have discussed till now, basically it started with the very beginning where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about His power and glory. And then as an expression of that, he talked about the creation of death and life and the purpose of life for human beings on this earth. And then he talked about the creation of the seven heavens. And we came to the ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then talked about the consequences in the hereafter. And he talked about the two groups, the believers and the non-believers, what will happen at the end. Now we come to the ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically will look at three ayat this evening where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is now talking about one more of His blessings, but then also with blessing and ni'mat there is an element of warning also. Because Quran has both. It has good news as well as warning that if you do not follow the message, what will happen. Just to connect to the earlier ayat, again this is an ayat beginning with the words Alladhi, which is to connect that Allah is the one who has the absolute control of the universe. And then he talked about creation of life for us, and then the seven heavens. And then this is again continuing with that, هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ظلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور. It is He who made the earth gentle for you. Therefore walk on its shoulders, and we'll come to that mean word. What does it mean? Eat from its provision, and to Him shall be your return. When you look at this ayat, the very first sentence, هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ظلولا, that He is the one who made the earth gentle for you. When we look at the word zalul and zalil, it's all in the same meaning. This is actually more stronger than zalil. Well, don't use for people. Don't learn more harsh words. Basically here it means that somebody or something which is subservient and under domination of someone or something. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that I created this earth, but I made it zalul for you. This dunya has been created for you. It's subservient to you. In the sense that if you look at the whole process, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the term zalul, which is used, and we'll see in this next sentence also, the example of an animal. Once you have tamed the horse or the camel, then they are in your control absolutely. They are calm even when you ride on it, and you control them. And the same term has been used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if this earth is your animal on which you are riding. And this animal has been made subservient to you. It is gentle towards you. So you have in a way absolute control on this earth. And when we look at it, there are different ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the earth subservient to us. Even the way He has created it. It is basically has been made in such a way that life is sustainable on this planet. Look at the rotation of the earth. You know how fast it moves around its own axis? Anybody has any idea? Huh? It's 1,000 miles an hour. But do we feel it? If you're going on a car with that speed, you wouldn't even be able to know what you are doing. But it's rotating around its own axis with that speed, but still it is gentle. We do not even feel it. And if this, when we look at the speed of it, if it was even lesser than that by 100 miles speed, then even the day and the night will be longer, and we will not be able to survive here, because then with the longer night, people would be freezing, vegetation would be freezing, and with longer day, we'll be roasting. And so even when you look at the distance of the earth from the sun, that is also appropriate so that human life can survive on this planet. If it was closer or even further away, then it would have been more difficult for us. Even the slant of the earth, when we look at 23 degrees angle, this is where we get the seasons. And so everything that we see, even when we look at, for example, the moon and the distance between the moon and the earth, this is where our tides are controlled. If it was any different from that, then we would have, for example, according to some of the scientists, we will have, flooding of the tides, flooding the entire globe twice every day. And so everything has been made by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala according to the requirements of human beings. So this dunya is for us. And that is the main message here, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the earth, gentle for you. The first blessing that He is referring to. And then we look at the following sentence. Therefore, He says, "Famshu fi manakibiha." This is where the expression manakib, the shoulders of, when you ride, for example, on the horse or a camel. This is where we are told that, as if this earth is an animal made subservient and gentle and humble to the human being. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so walk on it. We have created this for you. Now, it's not just an issue of walking, we basically exploit this earth. We use it for source of our food, and we dig in to get the minerals and many other things that we do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the earth, another term He uses in Quran is musakhar. This has been given into your control. Of course, we have amanat here, and we have to take care of take care of this amanat in the right way. Further on, he basically, when he talks about this issue of walking on the shoulders, as I said, this is a symbolic way of doing it. Even the surface of the earth for us, it is neither that soft that if we started to walking on it, we will be stuck in it, nor is it so hard that walking on it will become difficult for us. So everything that we see on the earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it in such a way that it is for us. The next ayat, the sentence there, وَكُلُوا مِنْ رِزْقِهِ, and eat from the provision and the sustenance that you derive from this earth. And this term rizq covers everything, whether it is the sustenance from animal or the vegetation or any other source on this planet for us. It's interesting that Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi connects the previous sentence, walk on the earth, with eating from the provision. He says, walking, the order is there, wamshu, walk on the earth. As if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would like to say that for you to get your rizq, you have to move. There has to be harakat to get the barakat. You can't just sit there and be idle and get anything. Rather, you have to work. And we have interesting examples in the Quran. If you look at the story of Hazrat Maryam, in Surah Maryam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about her birth, and how she was given into the custody of Prophet Zachariah and placed in a very holy place in the temple in Jerusalem, where, according to Quran, nobody was allowed to enter that room but Zachariah. He was the custodian. He would bring food and drink, whatever she required. He was the one who was allowed to enter that room. But Quran says there were times when he would go in the room and he will find food which he didn't bring. And he will ask Maryam, where did you get it from? Nobody is allowed to come here. And she would say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who has sent it down. That was a special favor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to Maryam in order to prepare her for the one of the greatest miracles of human history, and that was the birth of Isa ibn Maryam. But then on one hand we see that when she has Zachariah as a custodian who is providing for her, Allah gives us an example that He is sending rizq to her directly when she doesn't need, because she has somebody who can help. But then when you go further on in that surah and you look at the birth of Isa ibn Maryam, where Maryam is all alone, it is a difficult time for her to give birth to a child. And there, she is sitting there by the palm tree, or, resting on the trunk of the palm tree, which was dry. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "O Maryam, extend your hand, pull the branch down, and you will get the ripe dates coming onto you." In the first case where she didn't need anything, Allah decided to give her the food, send it from Jannah. Now that she is in need, Allah says, at least, I would like you to lift your hand, pull the branch down and shake it. As if there is a symbolism that, risk comes to you, yes. It's very exceptional that it will come in a plate to you, direct delivery from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that doesn't happen all the time. Normally, you will have to do something. And this is where we see that the issue of wamshu, ala manakibiha, that you walk on this earth, and then wakulu min rizqihi, and then eat the sustenance. The translation here is from the previous sentence anyway. Wakulu min rizqihi means eat from its sustenance. And so the connection there is that even to get the rizq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will have to walk and we will have to do the hard work. Salawat. Then the last two words from this ayat, وَإِلَيْهِ النُّشُورِ, and to Him shall be your return. When we look at this is an ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about this blessing of this earth for us. Describes three things. One is that the earth has been made gentle. Number two, you have the ability to walk on it and control it. And number three, you seek provision from this earth. But at the end, He says, remember, this dunya is not forever. Not only that, this dunya is not forever. Rather, this dunya is for you, but you are for me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the dunya for us, but we have been created for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that symbolizes the words, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So at the end when He says, wa ilayhi nushur, and to Him shall you be returned, or your return will be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is emphasizing that don't consider this to be your final abode. This is where you will prepare yourself in order to get provision for the hereafter, which is your final and everlasting abode. Going on to the next ayat, and this is where we see the element of warning is coming up. On one hand, He is talking about the blessings, and then He says, but remember, don't take this message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lightly. The messengers have come. The Prophet is known as Bashir, who gives good tidings and good news, as well as Nazir. Nazir means somebody who gives warnings. And so this balance has been there in the message from Adam to the last prophet. Quran also uses both elements all the time. And this is where we see one ayat is about ni'mat, then immediately then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَأَمِنْتُمْ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاءِ أَنْ يَقْصِفَ بِكُمُ الْأَرْضِ فَإِذَا هِيَ تَمُورُ. Do you feel secure that He who is in the heaven will not cause the earth to swallow you while it shakes? It's amazing here we see that on the one hand, earth was described in the previous ayat as a blessing. It is made humble and gentle to human beings. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't take me for granted. Don't think that you have any guarantees from me and you feel secure from me who is there, not in a physical sense. Fis sama also means, in a spiritual elevated space, not necessarily in the physical meaning. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I can change this ni'mat into a bala for you. The same earth that I've described as a source of provision and shelter and everything subservient to you, I can use this same earth and it can start shaking very violently. And we see some examples of the isolated earthquakes here and there. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if I want to punish, I can use that method. And this gentle earth can become a shaking earth. And so remember that and do not take things for granted. The same message is repeated in the next ayat. Am amintum man fis sama an yursila alaykum hasiban fasata'lamuna kayfa nadhir. Do you feel secure that He who is in the heaven will not unleash upon you a rain of pebbles and stones? Then you shall know how is my warning. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if I want to punish you, it's not only the earth that I can use. It's not only the earth and the earthquake and you will be swallowed in it. I can even rain down pebbles from the sky. And so there is no limitation in my power to punish you. Finally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ كَذَّبَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ فَكَيْفَ كَانَ النَّكِيرُ. Remember that there were people who had come even before. Nations had come before who had rejected the message. And, we dealt with them. We know the many stories in the Quran and even in the Bible about the nations who rejected the message of the prophets of their own time, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed them in different ways. The story of Nuh alayhi salam, the people of Lut, and different other, nations, Ad and Samud. Some of them were very powerful, and they have their own, civilizations and their own, level of technology. But when the time came, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed. And this is amazing that sometimes, human societies build up civilizations for centuries. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides to, destroy them and punish them, it doesn't take that long. Centuries of civilizations and technology that they have used comes to a total, end with the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is where we see that, in these, the passage that we looked at this evening, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has combined the element of blessing as well as the element of warning. And this comes all the time. As we saw in the earlier ayat yesterday, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala there also talks about the element of, maghfirah first and ajr kareem later on. The reason why maghfirat came first was just to assure us that if we are sincere in repenting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive us. And after that assurance comes the issue of the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat alaykum. Just a point I would like to go back to the ayat which we discussed yesterday. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ بِرَبِّهِمْ بِالْغَيْبِ. praising the believers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said that these are the people who fear their Lord in secret. Not only in public life, but even when they are alone, they are aware of Allah's presence. There is a sentence in the dua Arafah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And I'm sure, those of you who are going for Hajj in Arafat, you recited that dua. MashaAllah, some of you have gone many, many times, and may Allah increase your numbers for Hajj. Next time when you go and look at the translation, you will see there is a long preamble where Imam is praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and acknowledging the blessings that He has given to him. And then when he comes to the dua, the actual part where he is asking for something, the very first dua is very interesting, where he says, Allahumma ja'alni akhshaka ka'anni arak. The very first dua of Imam Hussain alayhi salam is that, oh Allah, give me that fear of fearing you as if I see you in front of myself. When we talk about this whole issue of infallibility, it's not that the Masoom were robots and Allah had taken away the capability of committing sins. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a virtue to be Masoom. No, they had the ability, but they wouldn't do it. And the reason why they wouldn't commit any sin is because of that level of khashiyah. I give you this example many times that, when we go on the highways, if we already see the cars coming from the other side, blinking their lights, indication that there is a police, sitting there with the radar, our speed automatically drops down. What is it? We know somebody is watching, and so we are controlled. We are careful. That is the sense of khashiyah here. If we have that concept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what we call hazir and nazir, He is there, and He watches us all the time. That awareness brings about that power to keep ourselves from committing sins. And when you talk about the ma'asumeen, the anbiya and mursaleen and the a'imma, for them that khashiyah is on that level that for them Qiyamah is not something which will happen in the future. For them Hisab and Kitab and Jannat and Jahannam is not something which will happen in the future. It is as if they can see it. They can see the action and the consequences right there. And it's that power which gives them the ability to refrain from committing sins. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the ayat that we discussed yesterday and emphasized the point, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ بِرَبِّهِمْ بِالْغَيْبِ, that it's not only good enough to be careful of Allah in public, because that becomes shirk khafi. Rather, the main worth of a Muslim is when he or she is also careful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even when they are alone. And that is actually the basis of salvation of a person. And that's where we see that the first dua of Imam Hussain alayhi salam is, Allahumma ja'alni akhshaka ka'anni arak. Then give me that khashiyah and that fear of you as if I can see you right in front of myself. We had also talked about the methods of training ourselves to do things where we will not do riyah and do good deeds to show off to the people. As I had mentioned that when we do the wajibat, there is no problem in doing it publicly. But when we do especially when it comes to, for example, wajib zakat or wajib khums, doesn't matter, you have to pay anyway. But when it comes to charity and sadaqat, the preferred way would be to do it in such a way that, others don't know about it. Because that creates this level of sincerity. Because you are doing it only to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not to gain fame or, recognition from the people. And that's the issue of, يَخْشَوْنَ بِرَبِّهِمْ بِالْغَيْبِ. And one of the methods of doing that is what I had mentioned, that when it comes to even sunnat namaz, the recommendation is that you do it at home. Because when you are there alone, it has more, the chances of sincerity and doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we talked about the sunnat namaz of the month of Ramadan, although we do not believe in the system of Taraweeh. But the problem with the Shias is they've completely forgotten that they are extra sunnat namaz for the month of Ramadan also. And somebody had even asked me some questions about it, so I thought maybe we'll just go through a chart very briefly here, that the special nawafil for the month of Ramadan, although it's already the 8th of Ramadan today, from the eve of 1st to the 20th, there are 20 rakat every night, 2 rakat each, 10 times. And then from the eve of 21st to 30th, at the end, if we get 30 days of fasting, it is that becomes 30 rakat. So you add 10 more rakat into those 2 rakat that you are doing. And this takes you to about 700 rakat in the whole month. Then you add the 19th, the 21st and 23rd, doing 100 rakat all 3 nights. You basically get 1,000, recommended nafilah rakat for the month of Ramadan. And so this is there. Unfortunately, just because we say we don't believe in Taraweeh, the Jamaat form, which is done by the Sunni Muslims, it doesn't mean we should just forget it. No, this is something highly recommended even in our fiqh, but it is to be done individually and privately. And that's where, the hadith of the Prophet where he says, I recommend you to say prayers in your homes because the best of a person's prayer is in his home except for the obligatory prayers. In wajib namaz, to go to masjid is recommended. To go to the Jamaat prayers is highly recommended. But when it comes to nafilah prayers, home is the place. And so keep that in mind, inshallah, and whatever remaining days that we have of this month of Ramadan, let us try to maximize the spirit of Allah's forgiveness and rahmat, inshallah. Salawat.